Let's be honest. You think you have it tough? You wake up, check your phone, complain about traffic, and call it a hard day. Meanwhile, your ancestors woke up every single morning with one thought: don't get eaten, no weapons, no walls, no insurance, just a slightly above average brain and the audacity to not go extinct. And somehow, against every single apex predator on this planet, they won. Every single time. Because if even one of them had lost, you wouldn't be here complaining about your commute. So today, we're going to break down exactly how ancient humans survived the most dangerous creatures to ever walk, swim, and fly across this earth. And by the end of this video, you will have a deep appreciation for your ancestors. Or at the very least, you will feel significantly worse about yourself by comparison. Let's begin. Number 10. Cave lions. Let's start easy. The cave lion was essentially a regular lion, but bigger, faster, and significantly less interested in your survival as a species. Standing nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder and stretching up to 8 feet in length, the cave lion roamed Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years and made absolutely zero friends. Now you might be thinking, my ancestors had nothing. No weapons, no armor, no strategy. How did they possibly survive an encounter with something like this? Wrong. They had something far more dangerous than any of that. They had each other. Here's how a typical cave lion encounter went for your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. She's gathering berries, minding her business, living her best prehistoric life. And then she hears it. That low rumbling growl that means something very large has decided that you look like lunch. First thing she does. Doesn't run, doesn't scream, doesn't check her mentions. She calls for backup. See, ancient humans had already figured out by this point that the lone wolf strategy was essentially a death sentence. So they moved in groups, communicated through a combination of early language, hand signals, and what anthropologists describe as an absolutely terrifying amount of screaming. The group surrounds the lion. Everyone grabs the nearest rock, stick, or frankly, anything that isn't nailed down. They make themselves look enormous. They scream. They throw things. They make the cave lion genuinely reconsider every decision it has ever made. And in most cases, the cave lion walks away. Because even apex predators understand basic math. 1 lion versus 12 screaming humans armed with rocks and absolutely nothing to lose is not a winning equation. Your ancestors didn't survive the cave lion by being stronger. They survived it by making the cave lion do the math and not liking the answer. Number 9. Megalania. Now, we're getting into the interesting ones. Megalania was essentially a Komodo dragon that looked at a regular Komodo dragon and said, adorable, this thing reached up to 18 feet in length, weighed as much as a small car, and possessed a bite so venomous that a single graze could end your afternoon permanently. It roamed ancient Australia somewhere between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, which is right around the same time that humans first arrived in Australia. Coincidence? Absolutely not. Now here's the thing about Megalania that your ancestors very quickly figured out. It was ambush predator. Which sounds terrifying until you understand what that actually means. It means it had exactly one strategy. Hide, wait, lunge. That's the whole playbook. And your ancestors, who had been outrunning, outsmarting, and outsurviving things since they could walk upright, had exactly zero patience for a creature with a one-move combo. Here's how ancient Australians handled Megalania. They learned its habits. Where it rested. Where it hunted. What trails it used. Because when you don't have the luxury of being the biggest thing in the room, you invest heavily in information. They traveled in the middle of open ground away from dense brush where the ambush was impossible. They used fire, which, and this cannot be overstated, is the single greatest weapon ever discovered in human history, and one that Megalania had absolutely no counter for. And most importantly, they hunted it back. Megalania disappeared from the fossil record roughly around the same time humans showed up in mass numbers. Make of that what you will. Your ancestors didn't survive Megalania by avoiding it. They made it go extinct, which, if we're being honest, is the most ancient human thing imaginable. Number 8. Short-faced bear you thought regular bears were bad. Cute, the short-faced bear stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder, on all fours. When it stood up on its hind legs, it reached 11 to 12 feet. It weighed up to 2,500 pounds. It could run at speeds approaching 40 miles per hour. And it was not a picky eater. This creature roamed North America for hundreds of thousands of years and represented perhaps the single greatest physical threat any early human migrating into the Americas ever faced. Now here's what makes this survival story genuinely remarkable. Ancient humans crossed into North America via the Bering Land Bridge somewhere around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. The short-faced bear was waiting for them. And yet, here you are. How? Simple. Ancient humans did what they always do when confronted with something bigger, faster, and more physically gifted than themselves. They got sneaky. Short-faced bears, despite their absurd physical capabilities, had one critical weakness that your ancestors exploited with ruthless efficiency. They couldn't be everywhere at once. Early Americans hunted in coordinated groups using persistence hunting, a strategy where you don't need to be fast. You just need to be relentless. You follow an animal. You push it. You don't let it rest. You rotate hunters so the group stays fresh while the prey exhausts itself. And eventually, even the most physically dominant creature on the continent simply runs out of stamina. The short-faced bear wasn't outfought. It was outlasted. And sometime around 11,000 years ago, it disappeared entirely. Right around the same time, human populations in the Americas exploded. Your ancestors' survival strategy against the most physically imposing bear to ever exist was to simply be more annoying than it could handle. Honestly, very on brand for humans. Number 7, Haast's eagle. This is where things get genuinely terrifying. Haast's eagle was the largest eagle to ever exist. It lived in New Zealand and had a wingspan of up to 10 feet. Its talons were the size and shape of a modern tiger's claws, and its primary prey was the moa, a flightless bird that weighed up to 500 pounds. Which means this eagle regularly picked up and killed things heavier than most of you watching this video. Let that settle in for a moment. Now the Maori people arrived in New Zealand around 1280 AD, which in human history terms is basically yesterday afternoon. And they walked directly into an island ecosystem where the apex predator from above could and absolutely would attempt to carry away a human child. The Maori did not panic. They did something far more impressive. They remembered. The Maori oral tradition preserved descriptions of a giant eagle so accurate that when European scientists finally discovered the fossil remains of Haast's eagle centuries later, they were genuinely stunned by how precisely the legends described the animal's size, hunting behavior, and appearance. Your ancestors didn't just survive Haast's eagle. They documented it. Without paper. Without cameras. Without anything except the oldest and most powerful information storage system ever developed. A story told to children who told it to their children who told it to theirs. The practical survival strategy was equally impressive. The Maori stayed in groups in open areas where the eagle's ambush dive was impossible. They built shelters. They covered their children. They learned the eagle's hunting patterns the same way humans have always learned anything dangerous, by watching it very carefully while trying not to become its lunch. Haast's eagle went extinct shortly after the Maori arrived in New Zealand, because they also hunted the moa to extinction, which was the eagle's entire food supply. Your ancestors didn't just survive the apex predator. They accidentally deleted its entire food chain. Ruthless, completely unintentional, but ruthless. Number 6. Saber-toothed cat finally. A fair matchup. The saber-toothed cat, specifically Smilodon, is perhaps the most iconic prehistoric predator in human imagination. And for good reason. This animal possessed canine teeth up to 11 inches long, a muscular build that makes a modern lion look like it skipped leg day, and a bite force specifically engineered to clamp down on the throats of megafauna and end the discussion immediately. It lived alongside early humans in the Americas for thousands of years. And here is the part that should genuinely impress you. Early humans hunted alongside saber-toothed cats. Not against them, alongside them. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans and saber-toothed cats were often competing for the same prey in the same territories. Both were ambush hunters, both targeted large megafauna, both used intelligence and physical capability in combination. The difference is that only one of them could make a spear. And only one of them did. Your ancestors figured out somewhere around 300,000 years ago that a sharp stick attached to a longer stick changed every single equation in their favor. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether you were physically capable of taking down a mammoth or defending yourself against a saber-toothed cat. It was whether you had the patience to craft the tool and the accuracy to use it from a safe distance. Spoiler, they had both. The saber-toothed cat's 11-inch fangs, which were genuinely impressive, were actually a significant liability in close quarters against a group of humans with spears and no intention of getting close quarters in the first place. Smilodon went extinct around 10,000 years ago, which is the same window in which human hunting pressure on large mammals reached its absolute peak. Your ancestors didn't just survive the saber-toothed cat. They almost certainly contributed significantly to its extinction while barely breaking a sweat. Which, and I cannot stress this enough, is absolutely unhinged behavior. Number 5. Nile crocodile. The Nile crocodile has been trying to eat humans for so long that it has essentially become a tradition. These animals have barely changed in millions of years because they found a strategy that worked and had absolutely no interest in evolving past it. Hide in water. Wait, bite, death roll. Win, simple, effective, deeply annoying. Now, ancient humans, particularly those living along the Nile and across sub-Saharan Africa, needed water. There was no debate on this point. You cannot negotiate with dehydration. So avoiding crocodile-infested water entirely was simply not an option. What your ancestors did instead was arguably more impressive. They changed their behavior around the entire concept of water collection. They never approached the water's edge alone. Ever, groups would approach together, with designated watchers scanning the surface while others collected. They learned to read the water. The stillness that isn't natural stillness. The slight ripple that moves against the current. The way the water sits differently when something heavy is just beneath the surface. They developed an almost supernatural ability to detect the presence of a crocodile before it could initiate its ambush. They also, and this is the part that modern historians find fascinating, began using fire at the water's edge at night. Crocodiles, despite being fearless prehistoric killing machines, are deeply uncomfortable around fire and tend to avoid lit areas. Your ancestors essentially invented the concept of safe zones along dangerous waterways using nothing but burning sticks and collective knowledge passed between generations. They also eventually figured out that crocodile hide made exceptional material for clothing and protection. They didn't just survive the Nile crocodile. They turned it into a fashion choice. And somewhere, a crocodile is still trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Number 4. Woolly mammoth weight. Mammoths weren't predators. Correct, but standing 13 feet tall and weighing up to 13,000 pounds, a threatened woolly mammoth was more than capable of ending a human life with casual indifference, and early humans hunted them. Aggressively, constantly, at organized scale. Which means they were regularly putting themselves in situations where the largest land animal in their environment had every reason to be extremely upset with them. The fact that they survived this repeatedly and in large enough numbers to keep the species going is the kind of thing that should keep you up at night with pure ancestral pride. Here's how they did it. Coordinated drives. Groups of hunters would systematically herd mammoths toward cliffs, bogs, or narrow terrain where the animal's size became a disadvantage rather than an asset. They used noise, fire, and sheer coordinated chaos to push animals that weighed 6 tons into positions where they could be safely dispatched with spears from above or from the flanks. The engineering of the hunt was more impressive than the hunt itself. Your ancestors essentially invented large-scale project management in order to kill something the size of a small house. And it worked so well that the woolly mammoth no longer exists. Which is a fact that should make you simultaneously proud and slightly uncomfortable. Number 3. Giant hyena. The giant hyena, or Pachyrhinocuta, was roughly the size of a modern lion, possessed a bone-crushing bite that exceeded that of almost any land predator in history, and traveled in groups, making it one of the most consistently dangerous creatures your African ancestors ever faced. It also almost certainly scavenged human campsites and actively competed with early humans for food, shelter, and territory. This was not a passive neighbor situation. This was a prolonged, multi-thousand-year conflict between two highly intelligent, highly social, and deeply territorial species competing for the same ecological niche. And your ancestors won it through a combination of 3 things: fire, organization, and an absolute refusal to concede territory. Early humans kept fires burning through the night, maintained group watches, developed early warning systems using sound and smell that rival anything a modern security system could offer. And critically, they fought back. Not just defensively. Offensively, archaeological evidence of large carnivore bones found at early human sites suggests that your ancestors were actively hunting and killing large predators, not simply avoiding them. They treated the giant hyena not as a threat to survive, but as a competitor to defeat, which is a subtle but enormously important distinction. The difference between an animal that tries to survive a predator and one that decides to eliminate the competition entirely. Your ancestors chose option 2, every time. Number 2. Great white shark, ancient human. Here's a fun thought. The moment your ancestors first stood on a coastline and looked at the ocean looked back. Coastal human populations around the world, from ancient Polynesia to the early inhabitants of South Africa's coastline, depended on the ocean for survival. Fish, shellfish, and marine mammals represented critical caloric resources that inland environments simply couldn't match, which meant regular, sustained proximity to the ocean. To everything inside it. Great white sharks have been patrolling coastlines for millions of years, and ancient humans, equipped with nothing but rafts, early boats, and sharpened tools, went into that water anyway. The survival strategy here was not complicated, it was just extraordinarily brave. Ancient coastal humans learned the patterns of shark activity. Dawn and dusk, deep water drop-offs, areas near seal populations. They avoided these times and locations with the same intuitive accuracy that took modern marine biologists decades of formal research to confirm. They fished in groups, never alone. They processed catches quickly and away from the water's edge to avoid drawing attention. They developed fishing technologies, nets, traps, and lines that allowed them to extract resources from the ocean without unnecessary immersion. And in the cases where things went wrong, which they occasionally did, the group responded collectively. Your ancestors survived the great white shark the same way they survived everything else, by being smarter, more organized, and significantly more stubborn than anything the natural world could throw at them. Number 1. Themselves. Here it is. The apex predator that your ancestors spent more time surviving than any creature on this list. Other humans. The archaeological record is painfully clear on this point. Evidence of interpersonal violence, territorial conflict, and organized warfare appears consistently throughout human prehistory across every continent and every era. The greatest threat your ancestors faced was never the cave lion, the saber-toothed cat, the giant hyena, or the crocodile. It was the group over the next hill that wanted the same water source, the same hunting ground, and the same shelter. And yet, here's what makes humanity's story genuinely unlike anything else in the natural world. The survival strategy that worked against every single predator on this list, cooperation, communication, collective intelligence, shared knowledge, was the same strategy that eventually allowed humans to cooperate with strangers, then with neighboring groups, then with entire communities, then with civilizations. The thing that made you dangerous enough to survive a short-faced bear is the same thing that built every city, every institution, and every piece of technology you use today. Your ancestors didn't just survive apex predators. They used the pressure of survival to forge the most sophisticated social intelligence ever developed by any species on this planet. Every predator that tried to eat a human being was, in its own way, contributing to the evolutionary pressure that made humans smarter, more cooperative, and more adaptable. Every threat was an exam, and your ancestors passed every single one, without a single textbook. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, remember that you are the direct descendant of people who looked a cave lion in the eye, a saber-toothed cat in the face, and a 12-foot bear in the general direction. And did not blink. They didn't have apps, walls, weapons, or warning systems. They had each other, and a brain that refused to accept that anything on this planet was allowed to win. You carry all of that with you, every single day. Now stop complaining about your commute.